I never thought a single car ride could change the way I looked at my life, but sometimes the smallest detours lead us into places we never imagined. My name is Emma Carter, and if you asked anyone, they would tell you I have the perfect life. A stable home, a hardworking husband, and a marriage that looks unshakable from the outside. But when you live inside it, perfection feels different. It feels lonely. My husband David is a good man, responsible and driven. But somewhere between his endless meetings and late nights at the office, I stopped feeling like his wife and started feeling like a roommate. For months, maybe even years, I had ignored that emptiness. I convinced myself it was normal, that every marriage lost its spark after a while. But deep down, I longed for the smallest gestures, a hand held, a kiss without reason, a conversation that didn't revolve around work. And then one evening, something unexpected happened. David had invited me to a small dinner organized by his office. He spent the whole night talking numbers, strategies, and business deals with his colleagues. I sat quietly, smiling politely, sipping my drink, telling myself this was enough, that his success was our success. When the evening ended, David received a call and rushed off, apologizing that he had to handle something urgent. Before I could even gather my bag, he had already asked his colleague Ryan Blake to drive me home. I knew Ryan, of course. He had been over to our house once or twice, always polite, always respectful. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and made people look without trying. His smile was confident but not arrogant, his words smooth but not rehearsed. I hesitated when David suggested it, but Ryan insisted with such ease that I couldn't refuse without sounding rude. The drive started off simple enough. Polite small talk, the hum of the engine, the city lights flickering past. But unlike David, Ryan actually listened when I spoke. He asked about me, not just about David. He noticed details, my earrings, my choice of book on the seat beside me. His attention was disarming, almost dangerous, because it reminded me of a time when I felt seen. Then it happened. The car slowed at a red light, and in that pause between motion and stillness, the world seemed to shrink. He glanced at me, his eyes holding mine just a little longer than necessary. There was no touch, no words spoken, just a silence thick with meaning. My heart raced, betraying me, filling the air with a tension I hadn't felt in years. "You know," he said softly, breaking the silence, "David is lucky. Not just for what everyone sees, but for the woman who stands beside him." I should have looked away. I should have brushed it off with a laugh. But instead, I froze, caught between the comfort of loyalty and the thrill of temptation. My chest tightened as though that single compliment carried more weight than years of my husband's distracted gestures. The light turned green, but I remained suspended in that moment. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Like he saw through me, through the polished exterior, into the woman who had been waiting, silently, to feel desired again. The rest of the ride passed in fragments. I remember the sound of his laugh, the way his hand brushed the steering wheel, the warmth that lingered in the space between us. When he finally pulled up outside my house, I thanked him with a voice softer than I intended. As I stepped out, I felt a guilt creeping in, an awareness that something inside me had shifted. That night, lying beside David as he typed away on his laptop, I couldn't stop thinking about Ryan. Not because he was my husband's colleague, not because of what he said, but because of what I felt at that stoplight. It was the first time in years my heart had raced for someone. The first time I questioned if loneliness could make a faithful woman waver. And I hated myself for it. Yet at the same time, I couldn't deny it. That stoplight had become a mirror, showing me everything missing in my marriage. And though I promised myself it was harmless, just a fleeting moment, deep inside, I already knew I was standing at the edge of something I might not be strong enough to resist. The days that followed should have erased that moment from my mind, but instead, they replayed in quiet loops when I was alone. That single look at the stoplight, the way Ryan's voice wrapped around his words, the way he noticed me, it all clung to my thoughts like a stubborn shadow. I tried to shake it off, to focus on work, chores, or anything else, but every time David came home late and distracted, the memory returned with sharper edges. At first, I told myself it was nothing. A simple ride home, a compliment too easily given. But then the messages began. Small things, Ryan thanking me for my company that night, saying he hoped I got home safely. Perfectly innocent, if anyone else had seen them. But it wasn't what he said that mattered. It was how I felt reading them. My heart leapt at the sound of his name flashing on my phone. I should have stopped it there. I should have drawn a line. Instead, I replied. Casual, friendly, harmless. That's what I told myself. We talked about books, about movies, even about music. He asked questions David never asked. He remembered the little things I mentioned in passing, like the way I loved walking in the rain, or how I used to paint before life got too busy. His attention was subtle, but it filled the cracks I had long ignored. Meanwhile, at home, the silence grew heavier. Dinner with David meant sitting across from a man who barely lifted his eyes from his laptop. When I tried to share something about my day, his responses were short, distracted, sometimes even absent. It was as though he had moved into another world entirely, one where his job was his partner, and I was just a placeholder. And so, every unanswered need at home made Ryan's presence feel brighter. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was validation. It was the comfort of knowing someone noticed the parts of me that had been invisible for too long. Another office gathering came, and once again David left early, promising to finish something urgent. The pattern was so familiar by now that I didn't even feel disappointed. Ryan offered to drive me home again, his tone casual, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. I could have said no. I could have called a cab. But the truth was I didn't want to. The car ride was quiet at first, but not the kind of silence that weighed down like at home. This silence was charged, humming with something unspoken. I felt every movement, every glance. At a red light, the same stretch of time that had once felt harmless now felt dangerous. His hand shifted, brushing lightly against mine on the center console. It was nothing more than a touch, fleeting and almost accidental. But the jolt that surged through me was undeniable. I pulled my hand back quickly, heart racing, breath shallow. Ryan didn't push, didn't say a word. He just glanced at me, a knowing look in his eyes, one that made my chest tighten with both guilt and longing. That night, lying beside David, the guilt weighed heavy. I stared at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over. Why did such a small gesture feel so big? Why did it leave me awake while my husband slept soundly next to me? Days turned into weeks, and Ryan became the whisper at the back of my mind. Every message from him carried a thrill I couldn't admit out loud. I began to dress with more care when I knew I might see him. I caught myself smiling at my phone, then hiding it quickly as though I'd been caught. It wasn't an affair, not yet. But I knew I was drifting. The line between friendship and something more blurred with every conversation, every shared glance. And the worst part was I didn't stop it. I told myself I was in control, that I could pull back anytime. But deep down, I knew I was already on a road with no clear way to turn back. The truth was simple and terrifying. I craved what Ryan gave me. Not gifts or grand gestures, but attention, presence, the feeling of being seen. By the time another evening came where David excused himself early and Ryan's keys dangled in his hand, I didn't hesitate. I followed him to the car like it was the most natural thing in the world, even as my heart screamed warnings I didn't want to hear. That night, as we stopped once more at a red light, I didn't look away. For the first time, I let the silence hang, heavy and unbroken, waiting to see where it might lead. And though nothing had been spoken, though no kiss had been shared, I knew the truth. The choice had already been made. The night it finally happened didn't feel planned. It unfolded the way storms do, slowly at first, then suddenly all at once. David had taken me to a dinner, one of those formal events where spouses sit quietly at the edge of conversations. Halfway through, his phone buzzed, and just like always, he excused himself, saying he had to return to the office. I didn't protest anymore. I just nodded, the part of me that used to fight for his time long since gone quiet. When Ryan offered to take me home, there was no hesitation in my answer. The decision had already been made long before that evening, carved into me during those countless moments of silence with David, those lingering glances with Ryan, those text messages that felt like stolen warmth. We drove in silence at first, the hum of the car filling the space between us. My hands trembled in my lap, and I wasn't sure if it was guilt or anticipation that set them shaking. Ryan glanced at me once, then again, as though waiting for permission I couldn't bring myself to give out loud. But when we stopped at a red light, everything shifted. The air was thick, electric. This time, I didn't turn away. I met his eyes, and in that moment, words became unnecessary. Slowly, carefully, his hand reached for mine. I didn't pull away. I didn't resist. I let the warmth of his touch settle into my skin like it belonged there. When the light changed, he didn't move. He pulled over instead, guiding the car to a quiet side street where the world seemed to fade away. My heart pounded, the sound so loud I was sure he could hear it. I told myself to stop, to think of David, to remember the vows I had promised. But when Ryan leaned closer, when his lips brushed mine with a gentleness that unraveled me, every defense I had collapsed. The kiss was everything I hadn't realized I was starving for, slow, deep, filled with a hunger that matched my own. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't rushed. It was deliberate, as though he had been holding back for as long as I had. And for those few minutes, I let myself forget. Forget the ring on my finger, the man waiting at home, the life I had built. In that moment, I was just a woman who wanted to feel alive again. When he pulled back, breathless, the silence was deafening. Guilt crashed over me, colliding with desire, leaving me torn between two truths, that what I did was wrong, and that it felt unbearably right. Neither of us spoke much on the drive after that. The weight of what had happened hung heavy between us. When we pulled into my driveway, Ryan's hand lingered on the gearshift, his eyes searching mine for something, permission, maybe, or reassurance. I didn't give either. I just whispered a soft thank you, my voice trembling, and stepped out into the night. Inside, the house felt colder than ever. David's shoes by the door, his jacket hanging neatly on the hook, reminders of the life I had just betrayed. He wasn't home yet, still buried in his work, unaware of the storm that had taken place while he typed away under fluorescent lights. I stood in the hallway, staring at the walls we had painted together, the pictures we had hung, the memories we had built. For the first time, they didn't comfort me. They accused me. They whispered truths I wasn't ready to face. That night in bed, I lay awake beside him, staring into the dark. My lips still tingled with Ryan's kiss, my body still ached with the memory of his touch. And yet, my chest was heavy with guilt, with the knowledge that I had crossed a line I could never uncross. Infidelity doesn't always begin in a hotel room or with secrets whispered in the dark. Sometimes, it begins at a stoplight, with a glance that lingers too long, a touch that shouldn't have happened, a silence that says more than words ever could. I told myself it was just one kiss. I told myself it didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. It meant everything. It meant that my marriage was no longer the same. That I was no longer the same. And as I lay there, pretending to sleep while David typed away on his phone, a haunting thought burned through me. Sometimes the most dangerous roads aren't the ones we travel. They're the ones where we stop, where temptation waits patiently at a red light, ready to change the course of everything with one reckless choice.